Good morning and welcome to PHDwin Week 2025. My name is Garrett Gremillion and I'm very excited to be presenting the ethics speech this year, which will focus on ethics in reserve forecasting and asset valuation. Before we dive in, let's quickly review the disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are mine alone. They don't represent my employer, any professional society, or regulatory authority. This presentation is for educational purposes only. Trust me, I'm not giving legal advice. My goal is to equip you with frameworks, examples, and lessons learned regarding ethics so you can apply them in your own professional practice. Let me give you a little background on my career thus far. I have over 20 years of professional experience, 17 in the oil and gas industry, with positions that have taken me from commercial lending to field operations to overseeing reserves for both a public and private company. I am currently the Senior Vice President and one of the founders of Oakstone Resources, an oil and gas mineral company located in Houston, Texas. Prior to Oakstone, I held several positions at Blackstone Minerals Company, one of the largest publicly traded mineral companies in the U.S. Previous positions held include Vice President of Corporate Planning and Reserves, Vice President of Engineering and Geology, and Director of Engineering. Other positions outside of Blackstone include working as a field engineer for Baker Hughes, both onshore and offshore, and I started my career as a commercial banking officer for Whitney National Bank out of New Orleans. In my time, I've been on both sides of the table, helping generate reserve reports for bank syndicates and SEC filings, as well as reviewing and interpreting sell-side reports prepared by others for potential acquisitions. I've worked with executives, bankers, auditors, and third-party firms. I hold a Bachelor of Science in Geological Engineering from the University of Mississippi and a Master of Business Administration from the University of New Orleans. A quick review of topics we'll cover this morning. We'll begin by defining ethics, its role in our society, and how ethics is understood within a discipline or career. We'll discuss ethical decisions you currently make in your everyday life and how to think through what making a good ethical decision looks like. We will move on to ethical considerations for the overall petroleum industry, and then dive into ethics as it relates to forecasting and reserves, something more specific to reservoir engineering. We will touch on several case studies that have impacted our industry in the past and the fallouts from those events. And finally, I'll provide a list of tools and resources that you can refer to in order to take a deeper dive into ethics as it relates to our discipline. Let's start with the foundation. Merriam-Webster defines ethics as the discipline dealing with what is good and bad and with moral duty and obligation. In simple terms, ethics asks, what's the right thing to do, based on a set of shared beliefs? In a professional context, such as reservoir engineering or geology, ethics sets the standards for how we work and behave. They're not meant to restrict us, but to guide our actions and safeguard the integrity of our work. You shouldn't fear the study of ethics in your profession. It would be more appropriate to fear working in a field that does not currently have a high focus in this area. A current example playing out in real time is the debate over ethical guidelines for artificial intelligence. As the capabilities of AI grow, industry leaders and policymakers alike are calling for standards to prevent harmful consequences, both short and long term. Our petroleum industry has long recognized the importance of ethical considerations and investing in professional organizations to help guide decision making. Lastly, let's quickly comment on the difference between ethics and morals. The difference is important. Morals are your personal beliefs about what's right and wrong. Ethics are shared principles we agree to follow in a professional or societal context. Ethics consists of rules, standards, and acceptable practices. This set of rules provides benefits to the profession or society as ethics forms trust within outside relationships. It's worth noting that you might personally believe something is acceptable, but if the ethical guidelines within a profession say otherwise, the ethical standards should govern your conduct in that role or situation. For example, an engineer may follow an industry standard for safety factors, even if they personally think those standards are excessive. Why? because the code of ethics requires it. In those cases, you're acting ethically by adhering to the agreed upon standard, even if it doesn't match your personal moral beliefs. Let's start with the foundation. Merriam-Webster defines ethics as the discipline dealing with what is good and bad and with moral duty and obligation. In simple terms, ethics asks, what's the right thing to do, based on a set of shared beliefs. In a professional context, such as reservoir engineering or geology, ethics set the standard for how we work and behave. They're not meant to restrict us, but to guide our actions and safeguard the integrity of our work. You shouldn't fear the study of ethics in your profession. It would be more appropriate to fear working in a field that does not currently have a high focus in this area. A current example playing out in real time is the debate over ethical guidelines for artificial intelligence. As the capabilities of AI grow, industry leaders and policymakers alike are calling for standards to prevent harmful consequences, both short and long term. Our petroleum industry has long recognized the importance of ethical considerations and has invested in professional organizations to help guide our decision making. Lastly, let's quickly comment on the difference between ethics and morals. The difference is important. Morals are your personal beliefs about what's right and wrong. Ethics are shared principles we agree to follow in a professional or societal context. Ethics consists of rules, standards, and acceptable practices. This set of rules provides benefits to the profession or a society as ethics forms trust within outside relationships. It's worth noting that you might personally believe something is acceptable, but if the ethical guidelines within a profession say otherwise, the ethical standards should always govern your conduct in that role or situation. For example, an engineer may follow an industry standard for safety factors, even if they personally think those standards are excessive. Why? Because the code of ethics requires it. In those cases, you're acting ethically by adhering to the agreed upon standard, even if it doesn't match your personal beliefs. Trust is actually one of the many benefits ethics can provide to a community or profession. Ethics do more than just keep us out of trouble. Ethics, when applied appropriately, promotes cooperation, upholds fairness and justice, prevents harm to others, enables progress within the community, and protects the vulnerable. Imagine a society that did not trust its financial lending institutions, and in turn, those institutions did not trust its customers. The exchange of money for commerce would not occur. A business would slow down greatly. But there exist lending standards, rules, and financial ratios that are applied to loans across the industry to facilitate transactions, and in turn, those customers trust those institutions with their assets, cash balances, kids' college funds, etc. But who gets to set these ethical rules? Historically, philosophers and religious institutions have influenced and shaped organizations, both civic and sometimes professional, into setting ethical frameworks. Any government organization that intends to set criminal or civil laws over its citizens expresses some degree of ethics within those laws. Within professional bodies, organizations such as the SEC and FASB set rules to protect reputations and dealings of their professions by establishing codes of conduct and guidelines. And of course, individuals themselves operate within their own set of ethical principles to guide them in their everyday decision making. So how do you know if you've made a good ethical decision? There may be some basic concepts to consider before a decision or action is made. Some of these might include identifying stakeholders associated with the process and the consequences of various outcomes. You may have to balance competing interests between several different parties or priorities. One of the best indicators you have made a good ethical decision is that you can show transparency on how you arrived at your conclusion, and you're happy to take accountability of your final product. One of the other major goals is to strive to ensure that you and your actions are treating others with consistency and avoiding impartiality or bias. Other questions you might ask yourself include, Does this align with my core values or the core values of my organization? Is anyone being exploited in this situation? Is the outcome of this decision providing good for the community? It is always good to consider any long-term negative consequences, and if those consequences can be addressed now. Sometimes the answer can be very clear. Other times, there is no perfect choice. Try and balance competing interests as best as possible with all these questions in mind. The reality is we make dozens of ethical choices every day. When we go to the grocery store, as it relates to parenting our kids, how we relate to civic duties, or even driving decisions. Some of the questions on this page might hit home. Personally, I know that I struggle with being the most courteous driver all the time. In Houston, I am convinced that some folks see blinkers as a sign of weakness. In my mind, their attitude must be something like, "Keep Houston strong, thin out the herd. You're not getting in front of me." I'm sure that's not the right thing to do. But what if that person's vanity plate is really obnoxious? One thing is for sure, emotions can certainly cloud ethical decision making. So in sticking with the driving example, not only do you make ethical choices every day, but others around you do as well. Let's watch this scene unfold on 610 in Houston.
Drivers and nearby witnesses were stunned to watch this crazy towing job in Houston. Only in Houston, police say the blue sedan broke down, so the driver called his girlfriend to come on and help him with a tow. After they got on the road, the axle broke, causing the car to swing back and forth, and down the road they went.
Was the girlfriend driving?
No, he was driving.
I'm not surprised.
Sexist. The couple eventually pulled over. Neither driver got a ticket, but police say the owner of the blue sedan was arrested for an unrelated warrant out of state. Shocker.
Hey, man, yeah, they just got to sometimes just bite the bullet, call the tow truck driver, man.
These folks made some fairly poor choices in general, as well as some poor ethical ones. Would they have followed through with any of these actions if they had asked themselves the following questions beforehand? Could I get hurt? Is there the potential for hurting anyone else? Is this conforming with the highway laws of the state of Texas? Who else tows a car backwards at 60 miles an hour? Do I currently have any outstanding warrants for my arrest before I engage in some outrageous driving actions? I agree with the anchorman. Sometimes you just have to pay for the tow. Now that we've discussed some everyday ethical decisions, let's bring the conversation back to our petroleum industry, where we face a unique set of challenges across all aspects of our profession, upstream and downstream. Our industry is required to steward massive amounts of capital. And with that capital, we provide some amazing benefits to our society. We provide the energy needed for transporting goods and people via cars, trucks, trains, and planes. We produce electricity to run our homes and manufacturing facilities. Petroleum products heat us when the weather is cold and cool us when the weather is warm. Some of our industry's end products are the starting points for products in other industries that our society depends on, such as plastics, fertilizers, and pharmaceutical products. Most people are unaware of the roles we play in those areas. Hydrocarbons power telecommunications, create thousands of jobs, and offer investors opportunities to diversify in the energy sector. They also generate revenue streams for local, state, and federal governments. We have done, and currently do, a lot of good for the world around us, and that good will continue on into the future as we power AI data centers and other emerging tools. I personally believe no other industry has done more to bring people out of poverty around the world than oil and gas. But we also must balance these benefits with considerations for the environment, as well as truthful financial and reporting transparency to all stakeholders. Ethical oil and gas operations aren't just a matter of adhering to a society's legal codes. They create the crucial picture of how our industry is perceived by others. I'm confident the vast majority of our industry wants to be good stewards to the environment, investors of capital, and earn public trust. that as with any large industry, we have experienced technical incidents as well as some poor players who do not take their responsibilities seriously. It is my belief that the more responsible we are, the more transparent we are, the more we want to work to minimize the potential negative environmental impacts to our communities, the more we will be perceived in a positive light. Ethical standards, good practices, and transparent communication foster trust, and not only help our industry's public perception, they attract greater use of our products and a greater desire by others to invest in our companies. Let's continue to dive down from our industry into our discipline, reserve forecasting. For the next several slides, we'll focus on ethical approaches to forecasting production, the basis of reserves. One of the first attitudes to bring to the table is an honest handling of uncertainty and risk. There are several potential future outcomes from any data set. As Yogi Berra said, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. But I would add that applying best practices and industry standards derived from prior experience can greatly increase consistency and accuracy in forecasting. One of the first pieces of information to consider is what data do I have? Does it represent a complete data set, or are you missing any crucial information? Have you performed the proper analysis over the data to get comfortable and defend your answer? When working and manipulating data, it's always a good practice to review and clean it up if necessary and document all your work thoroughly. This will make for a very defensible product. Another important thought should be which tool or tools are the right ones to use when analyzing the data. Maybe you have already experienced and are comfortable forecasting in a certain play, or a coworker has that experience and can help guide you on the best tools and method to use. Ethical forecasting means using tools responsibly. Lastly, always be on the lookout for biases, both personal and in our tools you might use that can either overestimate or underestimate forecasts. Our industry has developed several effective methods to use in forecasting production over a wide range of reservoirs, and there are dozens of books and hundreds of SPE technical papers written by people who have spent the majority of their careers studying these methods. Leverage off that material. We have a very knowledgeable professionals in our industry that understand the nuances of these tools. Several organizations and societies host seminars, luncheons, and meetings that discuss these topics and continue educating professionals in the current uses and best applications of these forecasting methods. Our industry has adopted these tools and created others to help tackle forecasting issues, even as the industry itself has changed over time, from drilling conventional reservoirs to tight gas and coal bed methane wells to unconventional horizontal drilling. So how do we reduce the risk of error and bias in our workflows and increase the accuracy and dependability of our forecasts? As stated already, best practices start with understanding the data. Check for accuracy of the readings. Clean and reprocess data points if needed. Screen for shut-ins, workovers, or artificial lift changes. Then, understand the reservoir. Work with the geologist. I promise it's helpful. Understand the drive mechanisms. Review analog production trends from similar offsetting wells. And document your work so it can be audited and reproduced. This doesn't just make for a defensible product. It's very helpful in good communication. Choose the appropriate tools and use your judgment. You have likely reviewed thousands of wells in your career. You're going to have a good gut feel for what is reasonable and what is outside the realm of possibilities within a data set. More recently, the role of auto forecasting has been a hot topic in our profession. Dozens of tools now exist, some of which have actually been on the market for several years, and some make claims of fantastic accuracy. It is indisputable that they do some things very well. Our industry has drilled thousands of wells during the unconventional revolution. Data sets have gotten larger and computers have become much more powerful and faster. We are stuck in the crunch of less time and more wells. Some of these tools apply forecasts to thousands of wells in minutes. They are very efficient for potential deal screening, quick type curve work, and economics. Some also have made some very good data visualization tools embedded in their product, and others claim that they can integrate very well in traditional reserve software programs. But these tools are only as good as the data they're being fed, the workflows of the algorithm, and the judgments they are making on errant data within a series. How robust are these models really? I'm going to suggest that when you approach auto forecasting tools, please consider the following. What is included and excluded from your data sets? Are pressures considered anywhere in the process, and do they need to be? Is all the information you would normally use to forecast being considered? Have operational circumstances been accounted for? Can the tool identify flow regimes and apply forecasts appropriately? Are they learning from the older wells and applying that knowledge to the newer, more valuable wells? Has geology and spacing been considered? SPEE has performed several blind tests of various tools available on the market. It's worth reviewing their efforts. For the past 2 years, they have held bake-offs discussing and comparing these products. Thankfully, there are several organizations that aid our profession in guidance on forecasting. They have spent a lot of time considering best practices and have documented their thoughts on a wide range of forecasting topics. These organizations include SPE PRMS and SPEE. SPE PRMS is the cornerstone of forecasting guidance in our profession. SPEE has written several monographs on the topic of forecasting, including ones on forecasting in low-perm reservoirs. I urge you to lean on these institutions. They are there to help us refine our forecasting capabilities on plays that have been around for quite some time, as well as providing guidance on forecasting in new plays the industry has just started drilling. So again, why are standards important? Although standards leave room for interpretation by individuals and organizations, they provide a baseline. Let's use the example outside our industry, but familiar to everyone. How about the heat sensation produced by biting into a pepper? The effect of this feeling differs from person to person, as well as how much an individual likes or dislikes the peppery sensation. The Scoville heat scale was originally developed in 1912 by Wilbur Scoville, an American pharmacist working in the pharmaceutical industry. His goal was to quantify the heat level of pepper extracts for medicinal use. If a pepper had a score of 50,000 SHU, that meant it had to be diluted in his process 50,000 times before the heat sensation disappeared. The scale created a baseline to compare one pepper against another. If you know which pepper and SHU is most pleasant for you in your food, it may help you avoid other peppers which could be too strong or too weak. But honestly, does any sane person really want a Carolina Reaper in their salsa? Now that we've commented on best practices to forecast individual wells, the next step is to assemble them together into a complete reserve report. This is where those production curves become part of a formal, auditable document that ultimately communicates volumes and values to various stakeholders. So what is the goal in evaluating oil and gas reserves? This is the general definition, but it gets to the heart of what we're trying to communicate to an audience. The general purpose of a reserve report is to provide a technical and economic assessment of an oil and gas company's assets by estimating the recoverable volume of hydrocarbons under current conditions and to present the economic value associated with those volumes at a given point in time. Essentially, how much is a company's hydrocarbon assets worth? And if all reserves are done under similar standards, a reserve report gives stakeholders, whether their background is legal, financial, or in accounting, a common tool to evaluate a company's assets and performance. Outside parties do not have the proprietary data or perhaps the technical knowledge to reproduce or report themselves. Reserve reports are a communication tool for all audiences. Some folks may not know what an MCF is, but they can understand the dollars associated with it. Money is a universal language. Let's discuss how reserve reports are used. Reserves are reviewed by multiple parties, including stock analysts, commercial lenders, investment bankers, executives, internal managers, and outside investors. This community, in turn, uses that assessment of value to compare companies or opportunities against one another, value a company or a specific asset, assign risk to a loan or line of credit, price a bond issuance, or decide the best use of company capital when comparing different projects. Standards and best practices in reporting give this community not only a valuable tool, but the confidence it needs to make these decisions, which in turn allows us within the industry to keep drilling wells. What are some general best practices in ethical reserve estimation? First off, apply reserve definitions rigorously. Follow SPE PRMS guidelines as well as SEC rules when preparing an SEC report. Clearly understand and separate classifications and categories. Those categories communicate the degree of certainty or uncertainty about reported volumes and values. Document the assumptions used in the analysis and be prepared to defend those assumptions. And, as previously discussed, follow best practices in forecasting, adhering to industry guidelines and standards set out by our professional organizations. Some additional best practices include embracing peer review. Two sets of eyes are always better than one, and it's always beneficial to hear another point of view. It may give you food for thought on changing a forecast, analyzing inputs differently, or catching an obvious error. In the long run, peer review can save time. Be aware of bias and avoid cherry picking in the best wells when estimating PUD volumes. If the goal in your work is to achieve a P90 estimate, make sure the methods used reflect that desired outcome. For example, if you're creating an SEC report, you're going to want to have strong confidence when developing PUD locations. So use definitive geologic and engineering support. If the report is for internal planning purposes or something closer to a P50 estimate, calculated inputs may differ, and you may have more flexibility on some assumptions. Maybe you are expecting drilling efficiencies or lower costs in the future. You still want good documentation of all assumptions and should adhere to your company's internal guidelines. It always helps to communicate clearly to your audience by stating assumptions made, highlighting any important risks to a project or limitations of knowledge. Some of this information may be provided in the cover letter. Cover letters are important documents. They give a lot of good information to the audience. Just be careful. Not communicating clearly invites misunderstanding. So let's elaborate on some common pitfalls to avoid when forecasting producing reserve estimates. And let's start with reserve categorization. Reserve categorization conveys the relative degree of certainty. Reserve subcategorization is based on development and production status. If it's not online yet or shut in, it is not producing. With regard to reserve write-down discipline, it's been my experience that most people never have an issue in revising a forecast upward, but seem to hesitate when that forecast may need a downward revision. Up or down, your practice should be the same. What is the data saying? Do you have enough data to make a judgment call? And if best forecasting practices call for it, take the write-down. Lastly, if you're using an automatic forecasting tool, review the curves. No one is going to ask a software button when they have a question on a forecast. They're going to ask you. If you put your name on it, it's yours. Let's turn to a list of pitfalls to avoid when booking undeveloped reserves. Type curves become biased by ignoring poor performing wells or using unrealistic recovery factors. Next, drill down on drill schedules. If your company is not considering the capital it'll take to develop the stated schedule, you may want to think hard about the timing and have a conversation with the finance or planning departments. Keep track of your historical PUD conversion metrics. How did you do in converting PUDs in the previous 3 to 4 years? Did you convert 20%? Why not? There may be good reasons, but understand those reasons. What assumptions were made in those reports, and should you change your methodology? Next, honor the 5-year rule. Undrilled locations can be classified as having undeveloped reserves only if a development plan has been adopted indicating that they are scheduled to be drilled within 5 years, unless specific circumstances exist. If a location has been on the books for 5 years already and has not been drilled, you likely need to take it off. Ownership. It's always helpful to know you have the legal right to develop the asset. If a contract is not expected to be renewed in 2 to 3 years, you shouldn't put volumes on the books past that date. And lastly, when developing PUD volumes, give careful consideration to spacing and potential infill degradation. How will child wells be affected? So what happens when things go wrong in reserves? Two of the most notable and largest examples of reserve write-downs in our industry are Shell and El Paso's revisions in the 2000s. In Shell's case, they wrote down 4.47 billion BOE of previously reported proved hydrocarbon reserves, or 20% in 2004. Upon investigation, internal managers were aware of the situation stretching back to 2001. In fact, one employee complained in an email that they were sick and tired of lying about the extent of our reserves issues and the downward revisions because of far too aggressive, optimistic bookings. As a result of the findings, executives resigned and internal processes were altered. But the reputational damage was done. The SEC pursued a securities fraud case resulting in a multi-million-dollar settlement. In the El Paso incident, the company reduced its estimated proved oil and gas reserves by 1.8 TCFE, or 41%. Standard & Poor's rating service lowered El Paso's corporate credit rating to B- to reflect the write-down. The stock price suffered, and later on, the company exited several business lines. The SEC charged the company and several employees with fraud for improperly inflating their proved reserves. In 2019, the industry got a more recent example of reserve write-downs in the shale world. Around the 2015 to 2016 timeframe, Alta Mesa bought acreage to develop in Oklahoma's stacked play. When the company began trading on a public exchange in 2018, its market cap was $3.8 billion. Only 1 year later, the company shocked investors by writing down the value of its oil and gas assets as well as the pipeline operation by $3.2 billion and laid off the majority of its workforce. So what happened? During development of the asset, Alta Mesa reported drilling and completing 17 groups of wells with spacing ranging from 6 to 10 wells per section. The play targeted 3 different benches with dense spacing assumptions in each bench. It was thought that the benches were geologically isolated and the wells would produce independently. That turned out to not be the case. There was more interference than initially projected, and the potential production from wells was a fraction of what the operator initially expected. Shareholder lawsuits and formal investigations ensued. The lawsuits alleged misleading disclosures. The company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and its assets were eventually sold off at a fraction of what they were once worth. So how did these situations occur? These companies did not meet the SEC definitions of proved reserves. All lacked proper internal oversight and audits. In the El Paso case, The SEC's complaint alleged that in an environment of weak internal controls, El Paso assigned proved reserves to unproved reservoirs, attributed proved reserves to wells and undrilled locations without sufficient underlying data, and failed to take into account negative drilling and production trends when estimating and reporting its proved reserves. So when El Paso had new information from drilling activities suggesting that certain fields were not as productive as they were once estimated, they failed to investigate why and did not reduce or write down prior estimates. These weren't just technical failures, they were ethical failures as well. So why did these situations occur? Within the oil and gas industry, there exists tremendous pressure to replace your reserves and show a growing asset base. That pressure filters down the chain and can create a corporate mindset that prioritizes appearance over performance. Keep the stock price high, maintain a good credit rating, get the best financing terms. This attitude can also create a very negative cultural issue within the company. Let me pose this question as a litmus test on how good your company's culture is. How does your company handle bad news or a difference of opinion? If the answer doesn't give you comfort, maybe there is a better way that needs some discussion. Recognize when you're being pushed down a slippery slope. If it violates adherence to industry norms and guidelines, you're likely already there. The bottom line, reserve reports, especially public ones, must follow strict guidelines and standards so that the public, investors, and regulators can properly assess the company and its performance. Anything less is not only poor practice, it's a breach of trust. Next, let's dive into asset promotion and valuations. Rules and best practices really don't just apply to SEC or bank reserve reports. Before reserves ever hit a formal SEC report, they will show up in internal company exploration meetings or perhaps in a situation where a new management team is promoting an idea to outside investors. Both internal reports or promoted assets may, according to your company's guidelines, have a different set of standards than an SEC or bank reserve report. But they are helpful in evaluating potential plays, acquisitions, or wildcatting attempts, especially if the company has good internal guidelines in place on how to create them. Let's be very honest about our industry and face some hard facts. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. If you stick around long enough, you will see some new plays shoot to the top of the production chain and then a bunch that just don't work, even though we desperately want them to. I'd bet that when new engineers or geologists began their careers, they were very excited and dreamed about the massive economic possibilities of their exploration ideas. But how did these teams describe the level of risk and economic benefit around the potential play internally or with investors? What metrics were used? How did they describe forecasting and economics? When dreams didn't materialize, how did they explain it, and what were the interactions between disciplines within the company? Good internal policies and standards around risking and valuation metrics can greatly help these conversations and allow companies and investors to allocate capital properly within their portfolios. Before you even agree to perform an asset valuation or promote a new play, it's best to disclose any conflicts of interest you might have. These conflicts might include direct ownership of an oil and gas interest being evaluated, anticipating a royalty or override tied to the outcome of an investment, or already being employed by another party in the transaction. Some of these situations do naturally exist in our field, and that's okay. It's really the disclosure of some of that information that is the most important. Regarding other disclosures, you should discuss inputs around what pricing, LOE, CapEx assumptions were made in the evaluation. This might take efforts from several different departments: engineering, geology, accounting, and land. Let managers or clients know what you reviewed and what you did not review. As always, the information provided by your client is considered confidential and cannot be shared with outside parties. So what is expected from a fair valuation? A fair valuation requires a disciplined, transparent, and objective process that integrates best practices and standards from multiple disciplines. This work results in an economic forecast that balances risk and uncertainty with financial gain. Your clients or managers may not always like your answer, but they should appreciate the diligence and effort put forth in the process. Let's split the conversation apart for a couple of slides and discuss two specific types of asset valuations, one on internal company project promotion and another on promotion to outside investors. Regarding internal projects, employees present projects to management to compete for budget dollars. This sets the stage for some inherent conflicts. That's okay. In fact, that's kind of the point, but let the project economics experience the conflict, not the process or the people. If the company has standards and best practices across all teams performing the evaluations, it should help avoid what some people call the stretch case to get their project dollars approved while other teams lose out. The point is, if all employees are evaluating company projects with the same methods for inputs and calculations, whether that's porosity, recovery efficiency, type well creation, etc., it can greatly avoid some real awkward water cooler moments. Remember, you're on the same team, and you want your company to succeed with the best projects winning the most dollars. Good standards and ethical practices within a company can promote not only a good work environment and culture, but the highest return on dollars invested for the company. Regarding pitches to outside investors, state assumptions and methodology used in the valuation. Present upside or downside risk. Describe performance expectations and uncertainty, as well as any mechanical or technical risk associated with the project. All are appropriate topics of discussion. It always pays to be as transparent as possible when investing money on behalf of others. I believe this to be especially true in our space. We deal in technical areas that are foreign to many outside investors. Some have what I call the Jed Clampett attitude, where they believe every oil and gas project is going to make millions. Just put X on the map. Others may have already experienced a loss of investment in our space and be extremely jaded. Being open and providing good information up front helps to differentiate yourself from their prior experiences and may win your project capital commitments. So what are some common economic metrics that could be presented in these types of projects, internal or external? Let me propose some of the following. Internal rate of return describes how quickly you get your money back and is typically considered for capital efficiency. Return on investment, or how many times you get your money back over the life of the project, is also commonly used. Some managers or investors have sensitivities to payout dates, or when a project will turn cash flow positive for the company. Another powerful metric is net present value, or a stream of future cash flows discounted at a specific rate, indicating an IRR. NPV is an excellent way to discuss the balance of risk and reward. Price sensitivities and price scenarios also offer managers or clients what-if scenarios to consider. Price changes can greatly vary in our industry and can make or break projects. At the end of the day, the combination of all these metrics present a dashboard to investors and managers who may make a decision weighing one metric more heavily than another. But the full combination provides the big picture that helps managers plan their investment decisions. Financial metrics help distill our technical work efforts down to that common language of money. I want to spend a moment discussing the power of using various present values associated with appropriate reserve classifications and definitions. When communicating with decision makers, it can help to present a range of PVs with a reserve classification. Managers will typically understand current market conditions. For example, PDP is trading for PV10 or PV8. PUDs are trading at PV25 or 35. There may even be a need to put some value on possible or probable reserves or on the total resource base. Why is that important? It can help recognize all upside potential or downside scenarios that may be a better portrayal of the total project value, even though it falls outside of the formal definition of proved reserves according to certain criteria. Good conversations can be had discussing infill drilling or spacing that has not yet been proven, or if a reservoir is separated by a fault, but a technology being deployed strongly suggests the possibility of a large economic but unproven resource. Of course, with more uncertainty comes more risk and higher discount rates, which translate to lower values on those asset classifications. The point is, discussions like these help present a more complete picture of what the project can financially achieve for a company. I want to share with you a personal anecdote about a new play, one that I had a lot of hope for, but never materialized how I envisioned it. New horizontal drilling started in the Canyon Line play in North Texas around 2014 to 2015. The play had a lot of positive data points starting out of the gate. A new log through the section indicated an astronomically high volume of oil in place. We just need a small percent recovery over a fairly small acreage position to make an economic well. Two major, well-known operators were interested in the acreage and did take a position. As the mineral owner, we had a lot of running room, and I was drooling over the future royalty streams. However, things did not turn out that way. Operators drilled several dozen wells, but had a very difficult time in the vertical section, which caused well costs to skyrocket. The IPs on most wells came in lower than the initial wells drilled in the play. And to top it all off, oil prices went from $100 a barrel down into the 40s. Rigs disappeared and royalty revenues from the play shrunk. The oil is still there, it just doesn't seem to want to come out of the ground anytime soon. I had high hopes on operators fully developing the asset timely, but Mother Nature had different ideas. We had very good internal work done on trying to understand the play, and we communicated very well with operators. But when the play did not work out as hoped, we also tempered our future production volumes and any reserve forecasts for that area. As part of this presentation, I wanted to give a plug to professionally licensed engineers and the reports they produce. I'm not a PE myself, but I have used several different firms in my career to provide various reports for different projects. In doing so, I have come to greatly appreciate PE licensed engineers and the assistance they can provide. A PE signed report carries confidence in the evaluation, provides transparency, credibility, protects investor interest, and ensures ethical standards have been met. It always gives you a high level of certainty in the product, in how it was prepared, and in the high level of standards that were used in creating the report. I have used them appropriately and effectively as tools to negotiate with. I would also note that non-PE reports, sometimes prepared by a firm you may not be familiar with, can be lacking in review and have historically been a red flag for me that just signals, do your own homework. PE signed off on reports are a must for several industry needs, including revolving lines of credit and many debt instruments. They are very helpful and, in my opinion, really needed when in potential litigation proceedings. With the right PE firm behind you, they can actually save you costs in this area. The PE seal is recognized worldwide for a reason. It signals to outside parties that the high standards have been met and ethical practices have been woven into the final product. So as I start to wind things down, if I have not convinced you that ethics matters in our industry, let's take a look at some of the consequences of poor ethical standards and oversight in other parts of the economy. In 2008, the financial markets froze. Subprime mortgages made to higher risk borrowers, often with little documentation, were bundled into complex financial instruments and sold to investors globally as low-risk assets. Credit rating agencies provided favorable ratings to the products even though they had conflicts of interest, and banks, wanting to increase their balance sheets and revenues, were eager to dive into this new market. When borrowers began to default on loan payments within this pooled and low-risk asset class, the financial institutions that held the assets stumbled or collapsed, ultimately causing a worldwide recession. This was not just reflected in stock prices and firms on Wall Street. This was personal. People lost their jobs. Some lost their houses or businesses. Events like this affect the community in a negative way and erode trust in our financial markets. Some of the products that caused this event were new, misunderstood, and misrepresented to the market. The basic underwriting of the loans within these pooled assets lacked proper documentation and underwriting standards. The banks who made the loans exhibited poor diligence in their processes. Throw on top of all this the lack of proper internal and external oversight, along with the market's overall strong appetite to purchase these de-risked assets, and the stage was set for disruption from the get-go. It was never really going to work out well. It just took time to unwind. So, where in our industry can we turn to for help on the topic of ethics and standards? For those in Texas, the Texas Board of Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors hosts online ethics webinars and continuing education programs on a regular basis. SPE has a professional code of conduct, bylaws, and webinars, some of which have on-demand access right on their website. SPEE, I'll give a major plug for these guys, has an entire area on their website for ethics resources. They also host specific seminars on applying ethics to our field. And as always, check for internal company resources. Focusing on resources for ethical forecasting and reserve estimation, SPE and the PRMS provide a great amount of information. The SPE website will also have technical papers, webinars, publications, and training. SPEE has a very good material on forecasting and valuations, including Monograph 3, which focuses on practical evaluation methods to estimate undeveloped reserves in resource plays, and Monograph 4, which describes estimating ultimate recovery of developed wells in low-perm reservoirs. Both are specific to current low-perm resource plays. If you are a public filer, pay attention to SEC Regulation S.X and S-K. Relating to SEC filings, the Financial Accounting Standards Board Statement number 69 is going to tie into this conversation. The SEC relies on FASB to set accounting standards which should be understood when preparing a report. Lastly, be aware of the valuable information contained in the SEC's comment letters. These can be found on the EDGAR website and can offer insight into hot-button topics and sensitive areas for the SEC. Comment letters will provide guidance on their expectations. So to wrap it all up, this is our industry. We're responsible for it. As a last note, and a hopeful one for our industry, I have to think that as some money managers who have invested in energy projects outside of our industry might see their realized returns and reconsider investing in our sector of the energy space. We should be prepared to welcome those funds with transparency and the confidence that we can put them to work diligently and wisely, and for the betterment of our community. Thank you for your time today. I hope this conversation has been insightful. As we all go about our day, we make thousands of choices. Ethics may not be always at the forefront of our minds, but it's always in the background, shaping outcomes more than we realize.